To start off with a 19mm socket, remove all 5 of your lug nuts and then take the wheel off. If your wheel is stuck on like this one, go ahead and put on a lug nut for safety and then use a rubber mallet and tap it from the backside, but always hit the tire, not the rim. You don't want to damage the rim. Remove your lug nut and take the wheel off. Start by removing this nut here with an 18mm socket. Now with a hammer right here, that's going to break the tie rod free from the knuckle. Perfect. That's free. Leave it in there still, because now with a 21mm wrench, I want to break free this jam nut here. Sometimes these are kind of stuck. There we go. Now you can take the tie rod out, and when you take it off, count the amount of turns that it takes to take it off of the inner tie rod. That way when you put it on, you know exactly how many turns you've taken it off, and it'll get you as close as possible to a decent alignment so you can drive it down to your alignment shop and get it aligned. So for me, the outer tie rod is spinning with the inner at the same time. So I'm going to grab the inner with some locking pliers, put this back in, and try to break it free like this. There we go. Now pull it back out. Do it by hand, count the amount of turns. Okay, I had just over 21 turns, so I'll remember that number. Now let's get this jam nut off completely. Now remove this clamp off of the tie rod bellows boot. Next, what you want to do is remove this inner clamp right there. To do that, I'm going to use a pry bar and a hammer. Put the pry bar right up against that clamp and hammer it on the end of it. Perfect, that popped off. This is a single-use clamp. You don't want to reuse these, so take it and throw it in the trash. Now you can grab your boot, twist it, pull it off the rack, and now pull it off of the inner tie rod here. This might be a little challenging, but in order for me not to break it, oh, there we go, that broke free. The other way though, I want it to come this way. So I'm going to grab some rust penetrant, spray that right here. That's going to hopefully lubricate this area and allow this boot to come off. Perfect. Now you want to inspect it, make sure it's not damaged, torn, broken in any way. This one's good, so I'm good to reuse it. Next, I'm going to take my inner tie rod remover tool, and there are different types of tools that you can use. This is just one kind. This basically will clamp onto this inner joint, and once it's clamped on, you can use a 3/8 extension, twist it off. You want to make sure that this is nice and tight. That way it can grip onto that inner joint properly. And put my extension in. See if I can break it free. Now with it broken free, I can remove the tool. And remove your inner tie rod. Perfect. This seal here, make sure that it stays in place and it's in good condition. Now take your new tie rod. I installed some red thread locker on the threads. Thread it on all the way and bottom it out. Now take this same tool, put it on. Take your long extension and let's tighten this up. So once it's bottomed out, I like to go no more than 1/4 of a turn. Okay, the tool just skipped there, and this is definitely plenty tight. The reason you don't want to go too tight, is because you don't want to twist the rack internally, the steering rack. If you do, then you damage seals and other components. So just make it snug and put some thread locker on. That should be good. Now before I put the boot on, I'm going to use this little packet of grease that the inner tie rod came with and grease up this joint. That's going to allow for moisture to keep out of here, and it's going to also lubricate this area. That way it can last for a long time. Now take your boot, slide it on, and press it on all the way. This lines up perfectly here. Slide it up onto the steering rack. All right, that just clipped onto the steering rack. Reinstall this outer clamp. And for the inner part, what I'm going to do is get a wire tie and wire tie the boot around. And cut off the excess. Next, I'm going to coat these threads with some anti-seize. That'll prevent the jam nut from seizing on, as well as the outer tie rod. Drive this nut on. Now take your outer tie rod, thread it on the same amount of turns that it took to take it off. Okay, well that's 21 right there. Bottom out the jam nut. Take your outer tie rod, install it into the knuckle. Install your new castle nut and snug it up. Now let's torque this to 18 foot-pounds. Okay, that's tight. Next, you want to make sure that you line up the slot for the cotter pin with the castle nut, and to do that, you always want to tighten and not loosen. Put your cotter pin through and bend it over to lock it in. One last thing to do is to take your 21mm wrench and snug up this jam nut. That way everything is nice and secure. Perfect. And now straighten out the tie rod end so it's sitting perpendicular to the knuckle. Reinstall your wheel. Start on all 5 of your lug nuts, bottom them out, and torque them to 100 foot-pounds.